Ah, okay, that's good to know. 3 or 4 or 5 major dates and deadlines that are going to have an impact on your project. These can be a court deadline. They can be a client deadline. They can be a third-party deadline. They can be an internal deadline. I worked on a project for a group, in fact, in Canada. I was helping them. I was mentoring them, coaching them on a project, and I was noticing that one of the key players was showing a bulge, a woman that, right at that point where a man dares not ask, "Are you pregnant?" But eventually it came out from somebody else that yes, she was about 4 or 5 months along, and a little bit of calculation. I know lawyers don't do math, but this is, counting to 9 is not too hard. Her baby was due right in the middle of the crunch time on the project. And so I said to them, "What are you doing to plan around this?" And got a series of sheepish grins and blank stares. Well, that's a deadline. And of course, babies do come early and people go on bed rest. So you need to work, whatever your deadlines are, key deadlines like that one. This was a critical player on the project. You need to get those settled in advance, figure out what they are so you know they're coming and you can work around them. The budget, what's it going to cost? What are you going to spend in terms of dollars, hours, tokens, rubles, whatever it may be? Rubles were our nickname at Microsoft for internal dollars, for chargebacks. And they're just as important. They came out of somebody's budget. They prevented them from doing something else with those internal dollars, those rubles. Key staffing. If you have a key resource that you need to get on this project, whether that's internal, I need this person, or external, an expert witness you need to line up, nail those early. Who are the stakeholders? Especially the hidden stakeholders. If this is going to hit the press, for example, if this project is large enough, you're working with a corporation, this project's large enough to have some press impact, and these days with Facebook and Instagram, everything sort of has at least some sort of pseudo-press impact. Well, the Vice President of Marketing or the Chief Marketing Officer is likely to be a stakeholder. Think back to the Exxon Valdez. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember that, and I won't ask. But think back to the Exxon Valdez. The lawyers took that one over from the very beginning, from the early hours of the morning when they discovered that Captain Hazelwood had run, it wasn't even him at the helm, but they had run the tanker onto Bligh Reef. And the lawyers stonewalled everything, which ultimately cost Exxon an extra $4 or $5 billion. At least that is the estimates that I've heard from people who worked on that project, on that litigation. And by the way, when I ask people how many think that Exxon actually did anything to clean up the beaches, the answer is always, nah. In fact, they had hundreds of people there within a day. They had work for all of the people who had boats who were no longer able to make a livelihood fishing. They gave them work as part of the cleanup project. They did an enormous amount to try and make it right. Just nobody ever heard about it because nobody considered marketing as a stakeholder. And finally, what are the risks? What can go wrong? Because Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it will. Murphy is a factor, is a player on every one of your projects. So figuring out what can go wrong, identifying the major risks is really important. If you put all this together, whether it's in a series of notes, it's in 9 paragraphs, the way I've suggested here, it's a memo, whatever it may be, put all that stuff together and most importantly, get the client to buy off on it, to say, yes, this is what we are doing. Your projects are on the road to success. This is the single most important thing you can do at the beginning of the project, and it's hard because you get this urgency. The client doesn't tell you early. All of a sudden, it's we need this from you, we need that, and you're running around and you're scrambling, you're trying to put resources together, you're trying to figure out where you're going. Well, the problem is you don't know where you're going until you sit down and do a project charter, whether it is called a project charter or not, whether it is formal or not. One of the best project charters I ever had, one of the most effective, was written on a whiteboard in somebody's office, and we put a big do not erase sign around it, and that was our project charter. Now, we're not dumb. We also took some pictures of it because we knew that do not erase doesn't always work. That's managing risks, by the way. I forgot this is largely going to Canada. I do have the Canadian version of this, but unfortunately not in this set of slides. But people ask, how does project management fit into this? Because everybody remembers, even in Canada I've talked to people, they remember the phrase zealous representation, which isn't the way it actually is stated. A lawyer should represent a client zealously. That's from the ABA Model Code. It also says within the bounds of the law. That part sometimes gets forgotten, but the zealous is remembered. That has changed. A lawyer shall act with reasonable diligence and promptness. Diligence. Project management is diligence. It does not mean you have to do everything, because project management is always going to be about choices. We only have so much time. We only have so much money. We only have so many people. We need to make choices. And it's critical that as you start assigning tasks, and we'll get to assigning tasks later on today, later on this morning, this afternoon for you, many of you, figuring out what you're not going to do and how deep you're going to do some of those things is critical. And this is now supported by the Code of Ethics in the U.S. and Canada and Australia and other places that I have delivered this message. So those are the core elements of the project charter. One of the things that I talk about briefly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but when you staff up a project, think about what you're staffing it for. Remember, you're not only staffing it for your project, you're staffing it in terms of the whole department or the whole firm. So cost effectiveness, what's the value to the practice? Is this person going to learn something? Every project should, I think, unless it is the absolute most critical, most immediate project, it is a training opportunity for people to build their skills. And that's part of the costs of any project, I think. Because otherwise, we keep doing the same thing over and over, but we never get better at it because we don't have new people coming up who can build skill sets. Same thing for a firm. Same kinds of things. Capabilities is a big part of it. Availability is a big part of it. Profitability and cost effectiveness. But also, is this the best use of the resource, for example? This comes up a lot. I want to get all the most senior people on this project. Well, that may not be their best value to the firm, is to get all the senior people on it, because if you're doing research, a junior person can do it pretty much as fast as a senior person, for example. It's only so fast you can go through a computer and through LexisNexis. So the project charter, number one, that's how you manage the project. It's not the only way you manage the project, but it's one tool that you can use to start getting a handle on the project itself. So number two, let's talk about time. The second thing we can manage, and we have to manage, is time. So use the off switch to restore time to your day. What is the off switch? Well, what is the single biggest thing you can do to get time back in your day? If I told you, this is going to sound like a Ron Popeil commercial for those who remember the Pocket Fisherman and other such doodads. What if I told you that with 2 clicks of your mouse, I could get you 20 minutes in your day back, 20 additional minutes in your day? Now how much would you pay? As always his pitch line, right? Well, the truth is I can do that. File, exit. Go to Outlook, click File, click Exit. Take your, this is an old BlackBerry, isn't it? I really need to update this slide. Take your phone, your smart device, put it on mute. Don't have it buzz you for every incoming email. Now, I love email. I think email is a terrific way to communicate. But it works best when it does what it's designed for, which is that you send it to me when you are ready, when you have an issue, when something comes up, and I respond to it when I have time to look at it. If it is truly urgent, we have these other devices, telephones. Telephones that sometimes fall off my stand. We have these other devices that we can use to get urgent communication. I do think we should be on email. I love email, as I said. But I don't think we should be on it all the time. We need to find times to do email. It is a task like every other task. Let me give you an example. Here is a typical lawyer billable hour, and I know that we don't have any lawyers, or we didn't have any lawyers here at the start, but nonetheless, whatever you're doing, whether it is billable or not, whether you are technically tracking your hours or not, these things happen. It seems to go like this. I do some work on matter 1. Then I do some work on matter 2. I got something else to do on matter 1. Now I'm going to do some email. I've got somebody coming into my office for a discussion. If you ask Sue the lawyer what she did the second hour of the day, that's what she's going to tell you. Here's the reality. Yes, she spent some time on Matter 1, then she did some email. She started time on Matter 2, an email popped up. She responded to it. Spent some more time on Matter 2, then she remembered she had some Matter 1 to get to. Oh, more email. Now John comes into her office for a discussion. An email pops up while she's talking to John, and she responds to it. Now she continues, does this feel familiar? This is what we do. This is not efficient. This is neither efficient nor effective. So let's organize it. If we organize it, well, that doesn't save any time, but the reality is it actually does, because if you organize it, if you have time to spend on tasks, if you do not get interrupted, if you do not constantly task switch, focus switch, context switch from one task to another, you will be far more efficient. You will get an average of 8 to 10 to 12 minutes each hour back. I tested this with my teams. In fact, I tested it with 2 different teams that worked for me, and then began spreading the gospel at Microsoft to other teams. And they consistently saved 30 to 40 minutes a day by regulating their use of email, by doing email when it made sense for them to do it. Still responsive, just not instantaneously responsive because the phone works for that or instant messaging works for that. And they got all this time in their day back. Here was a study done by a Canadian agency. They looked at the amount of time that people spent. 28% of their day was spent on interruptions. 15 minutes. When they got interrupted, they spent on average 15 minutes off task. They believed that they spent an hour just flipping back and forth, dealing with these interruptions, most of which were not terribly important. And they described it as a 10% IQ loss. I'm not quite sure how they measured that last one. I do know that I cannot afford to lose 10% of my IQ. That would start putting me in not very nice numbers. So here's what you can do. Turn off this stuff. When new messages arrive, do not play a sound. Do not change the mouse pointer. Do not show an envelope icon on the taskbar. Nobody ever sees that one anyway. That's okay. Don't display the desktop alert. That's that blue thing that pops up in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and sits there for a second just long enough for you to not quite be able to read it before it vanishes again. Turn those things off. They really suck an amazing amount of your time, and when you get interrupted, you become less efficient. We cannot multitask. We think we do. But texting and driving, right? It only works as long as nothing changes on the road in front of you. Because if the person in front of you puts you on their brakes or cuts into your lane, it now takes you a while to respond. And we have a mess. Bends a bunch of metal. Hopefully it doesn't bend too much flesh and blood. We cannot multitask. So do email when you do email. Do your tasks for your clients, for your manager, for yourself when you do your tasks. Don't mix the two. All right, focus risk. This is the other part of it. Is it important and is it solvable? Here's where I think we want to spend our time. I want to spend most of our time, I don't know what the right numbers are, but this is a good start. I want to spend most of my time doing stuff that is important, yes, and that I can do something about. I can move the ball down the playing field. Right? I want to spend most of that. That's going to make me feel good. It's going to be a difference to the business, to the firm, to the corporation, to the client. That's where I want to spend my time. Now, it's not important, but I know the answer. Yeah, I want to spend a little bit of time there because I can take some load off other people's plates. And frankly, it makes me feel good to answer questions. So yeah, I'll spend a little time there, not much. It's important, but I can't solve it. World hunger. Right? My name is not Bill Gates. I can't solve that one. Even Bill can't solve it, though he's trying to make a dent. But it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good about myself to spend time on matters that are larger than myself. It doesn't have to be literally an external item like world hunger. It can be, what is the future of the firm? What is our future direction? What's our budget look like for next year? When you do a survey of job satisfaction, one of the biggest tells as to whether people are satisfied with their job, in a literal way, they will be there, they plan to be there for at least another year, is I get to work on things that are larger than my normal scope of responsibilities. So yeah, you want to spend a little bit of time there. It's important? No. I can't solve it? No. I don't want to spend any time there. But the thing is, those things pile up, and it's not long before the tiger of urgency comes in, turns everything urgent, 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 And we spend 95% of our time, it feels like, doing stuff that is not important, and you really cannot solve it. What are we having for lunch at the company meeting? I don't know. I can't solve that, and I don't care. If there's a poll, I'll put in a vote. Otherwise, I'm not getting involved. Who knows the answer to this? I don't. I don't have to get on this thread. The stuff that pops up in email tends to be in this no and no category. Not important, not solvable by me. Let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes and somebody else will solve it, whose problem it is. Now, if it is your problem, you want to solve it, but this is the stuff that's not your problem. So managing time. The more you can control your email, no, I'm not saying get out of email, and you can't necessarily turn email off, but what I do is I turn off all those flashy things, the cursor and the bell and the toast, it's called, the thing that pops up at the bottom of the display, and put my email window behind another window. And then when I want to get to email every 10, 15, 20 minutes, every hour, I will do email. And I would tell my business clients when I was at Microsoft in numerous departments, I would tell them, I will respond, I promise, I will read all my email and respond within 4 business hours. If you need me, my phone number is not only my phone number, my company, my desk phone listed in the corporate directory, my cell phone was listed in the corporate directory. If you need me, I don't care what the hour is, call me. You want a response instantly, call me. I did turn it off at night. So managing time, we can manage time. And I went into the last job I had at Microsoft. This goes back, 10 years ago. I went into my new manager, we're talking about all the things we're going to do, and I said, by the way, and I told him about my email policy. And I said, you're 3 or 4 doors down the hall, come get me or send your admin to get me or stick your head in the hall, out in the hall and yell. I'll be there. And he said, fine, and we went on to the other things. And at the end of the session, we talked for about 45, 50 minutes. At the end of the session, he said, Steve, tell me about that email thing again. And I did, and he said, that sounds really interesting. I wish I could do that. I said, why can't you? Long pause. He said, all right, I'm going to give it a try. And pretty soon the whole department had adopted it, and he even got our whole division, the vice president level, to adopt a we're not going to be on all email all the time policy, and we got more stuff done. It really does work. And in the book, in the book, 5 Tools for Busy Professionals, Legal Project Management Field Book, I actually show you how to do some things that will allow specific messages to come through, even if you have desktop alerts turned off for everyone else. So for example, messages from my boss, from his boss, the vice president, and from my other boss, my wife, those always popped up. Those are the only ones that did. Now sometimes if I was working on a project with a critical deadline, I might add 1 or 2 more to that on a temporary basis. Everything else could wait. Number 3 is create budgets. What can you manage? You can manage money. This is the 3rd item. You need to manage the money of the project. And again, whatever money means in this context. Here is a problem. How do you know you're done? This guy, you can't quite see him there because there is no build on the slides, but I've got a picture of a Supreme Court Justice, a U.S. Supreme Court Justice in the background. He's totally unmemorable. As a picture, he looks like every other 60-year-old white male in America. As a justice, he is famous for saying only one thing, one line of one opinion. His name is Potter Stewart. He was sitting on a case about pornography, and he said, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. That is the Potter Stewart method of determining done. It does not work. You cannot say, I'll know when we're done. It doesn't work. You have to figure out what done looks like in advance, and that means putting limits on things. That means working out a budget with the client about saying we will spend X amount on this piece and Y amount on that piece. The client says, well, I want you to do everything. So you're willing to pay for us to do everything? No, I don't have that kind of budget. Okay, let's go back to number 1. How much time do you want me to spend on some of these things? Everything has a cost. You want that boat? Yeah, it's a lovely boat. I would love that boat. Okay, if I tell you that boat's going to cost you $3 million Canadian plus, $100,000 a year in moorage, you still want that boat? Maybe not. Everything has a cost. One of the ways to ask people Do they want something? Or is it worth it is to put a cost on it, even if it's a very rough cost? This is going to run us, I don't know, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Do you want us to do it? Oh, I thought it was going to be about $5,000. Well, no, not the way you've asked us to do it, it isn't. So I can either give you the $5,000 version, or you can spend $50,000 and more doing what you've asked for. That's a perfectly fair question. It's a great question to ask of any client when they're asking for something that you know is going to take a lot of time, whether it's a literal, legal client or it is your internal customer. If you're, for example, I know there's a librarian on here, you've got internal customers. As your project manager, it's everybody on the project. We want to do this. What's it going to cost? If you don't have a cost, you don't know whether it's worth doing or not. We know that from life. We don't just go out and buy the latest car. We have to replace the windows in this house that I'm living in, and I guess you can't see it in the background of the picture. It's got a cost. We got an estimate on it, which is ugly, but it's a choice. We can either let them keep leaking or we can replace them. Everything has a cost, and you need to make a decision whether you're going to do it or not. The other way to handle that is when the client asks, what will it cost? You can ask, what's it worth? Not in the New York City sense of, hey, what's it worth to you? But what is at stake? What is really at stake here? I was talking to one client firm of mine some years ago, and I got an interesting question from one of the attorneys. It was largely a litigation firm. And he said, what if the client wants to spend more than it's worth? And I said, if the client understands that, well, okay, yeah. I don't understand what the issue is here. And he put it in interesting terms. He said he had one client who got into an employment dispute. The client was the employer, and one of his employees violated a contract, left the company. I don't remember the details. I probably couldn't share them if I did. And they engaged this firm, and so he goes and asks the client, well, this guy is pretty much judgment-proof from what we could tell. At a maximum, you're going to get maybe $1,000 out of him. Maybe it's going to cost you anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 to do that. Why do you want to do this? And the client said, I want to send a message. I want to make it clear that this is not something people can do to me. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, it was worth $5,000 to them. That's an important question to ask. What is it actually worth? What is at stake here? Most things are not like that. Clients rarely want to send a message. Occasionally, there is litigation, Merck litigating the first few Vioxx cases, attempting to make their point that they thought Vioxx was not at fault for these issues. Patent disputes sometimes. Obviously, trademarks, you have to pursue trademarks or they get diluted and ultimately abandoned. But most of the things that we do aren't worth doing everything on because the value isn't there. The value to the client is not there. But you can't guess at this stuff. You need to ask, and the only person who really can answer your question is the client. But you ask a lawyer sometimes, how long does great legal work take? And they will say, as long as it takes me. Well, I mean, first they'll say it depends. But secondly, they'll say, as long as it takes me. That's not a good answer. That's not a good answer because you can't afford that. We can't afford that. Our clients can't afford that. Our business partners cannot afford that. We have to say we're going for good work, really good work, but we have to avoid the problem of diminishing returns. Diminishing returns means doing more and more and getting less and less back. It's like sanding a piece of wood. At some point, it is smooth enough for whatever you're using it for. I just rebuilt our fence out front. That didn't have to be very smooth at all. If I'm refinishing a cabinet, which I'm totally incompetent at, but if I were refinishing a cabinet, it would have to be absolutely perfectly smooth. Maybe 200 grit sandpaper, maybe more. As I say, I'm not good at refinishing cabinets. But at some point, I'm going to just be sanding away good wood. I can't keep going over and over and over it. It has to be done at some point. And the trap in diminishing returns is we keep doing the work, and it still costs us whatever our internal rate is or billing rate. Let's say you're internally valued at $60 an hour. I'm just picking a number out of the air. Well, in the first hour, I'm giving you $120 worth of value. In the next hour, I'm giving you $100 worth of value. Tomorrow, I'm maybe giving you $50 and $40 worth of value each hour I spend trying to polish this thing. But it's costing $60 an hour and you're getting $40 worth of value. That's diminishing returns. That's something that a good project manager will glom onto and figure out where that point is. Where do we start hitting diminishing returns, and start making that clear with the people on the team. Now, am I talking about good enough? People always ask, Steve, it sounds like you're just saying do it good enough. And I'm going to say yes and no, because this is mispunctuated. You need periods, not a space and a question mark. I want good work, and I want to do good work, but I also want to know when it is enough. So good period, enough period. That is when the work is done, and it's time to move on to the next thing. So the next thing is actually about managing the client. And the way to manage the client is via something called the conditions of satisfaction. Again, whether you use this as a formal instrument or not, the concepts are what matter. I sometimes manage projects in a very formal manner. Often I just manage them through a series of pages, notes in OneNote, which I think is a terrific program. I would have stuff in OneNote. Whatever works. Excuse me. The scale of the project is what matters, and it determines how formal you get with this stuff. I think writing more down is probably better than writing less, but it depends for each of us on what our comfort level is. So I want to manage the client with the conditions of satisfaction. When I was on the client side in Microsoft Legal, I was effectively the client for, or the customer perhaps, for Microsoft IT, which is a massive organization. And we had a very, very, very large IT budget in legal. Because we were building our own e-discovery tool. This is back in the days of the Department of Justice suit, and there was no big tool out there available. We built our own e-discovery tool. We had our own patent tool. There were a bunch of things we were forced to be pioneers in, so we had a very big IT budget. And at one point, I got a new general manager over on, my compatriot over on the IT side. And she comes into my office one day, and she knows my background. We'd met a few times. And she says, Steve, I just want to remind you that the most important thing in all of this is managing client expectations. And I tried my best not to roll my eyes, because she was dead wrong. When you're managing client expectations, it's too late. You need to set client expectations. Yeah, things will go wrong and you need to manage, but if you do not set them to begin with, you're fighting a losing battle. You need to set client expectations, reach an agreement with the client on what you're going to do about these 5 things: deliverables, timeline, communication, cost, and the critical success factors. Let's look at each of these. Deliverables. Not only do you need to do what you say you'll do, but you need to understand how the client expects it. If the client says, hey, can you tell me what the answer to this question is? And you deliver a 14-page memo, beautifully reasoned with footnotes and great formatting, what is the client going to do? They're going to pick up the phone and call you and say, can you condense that to a one-line answer, please? What does the client expect? If they're expecting a memo, deliver a memo. If they're expecting a phone call, give them a phone call. If they want a rough estimate, give them a rough estimate. Figure out what the client expects and what form they expect it in. An email? Great. A report? Great. Whatever it is, that's what you need to do. And you can, of course, set those expectations with the client. So I'm going to give you this answer in a phone call and a one-line email to follow it up. Will that work for you? Yeah, sounds great. Or, no, I need something from my files that I could show my boss. Oh, okay, good, but we'll work on that instead. So by asking these questions, by having this little mini negotiation, you figure out what the client really needs in terms of deliverables. And then, of course, you need to do what you say you'll do. Granted, stuff will come up, but at least that is the default response and should be what happens most of the time. So next thing is the timeline. Do it when you say you'll do it. But the other half of this is, when does the client expect it? If I'm talking with a client, again, I'm not necessarily talking about the lawyer talking with the legal client. We all have clients. We all have customers. We all have people we do work for. If I'm talking with that person and she asks me to do this task, and I say, great. And in my mind, this is Wednesday, right? In my mind, I say, okay, I can do this. I got about 5 other things to do that are all important for 3 other clients, but I can do this, I think, on Monday, and I intend to deliver this on Tuesday. I don't say anything because that seems very reasonable to me. The client, however, is thinking, I asked for this, and Steve says he's going to do it. Great, then I should have it overnight, right? Because that's the thing he's going to work on. And now when I don't deliver it Thursday morning, tomorrow morning, the client is upset. And why is the client upset? And they are properly upset because I did not set expectations. I did not have a discussion with the client and say, I can get this to you on Tuesday. Will that work? I may not even, depending on the client, I may not even say the will that work part. I can get this to you on Tuesday. Good? Not give them a chance to argue unless it is truly, truly critical to them. So number 3, conditions of satisfaction. This is communication. When do you talk with the client? Some clients want you to communicate with them regularly on schedule. Every Wednesday, a status report. Or every Thursday, a sit-down meeting. Others say, tell me when something interesting happens. Tell me when something changes. Now, if you get those two confused, you're going to have unhappy clients. The client is expecting a status report and you don't deliver anything because you're going to tell them when something changes. They're unhappy. The client who only wants to know about things that matter and keeps getting the status report from you every Wednesday without fail, finally the third Wednesday comes and says, why are you sending me all this stuff? And how much time are you spending working on it? Figure out what the client wants. When do you talk with the client? How do you talk with the client? Some are phone people. Some are email people. Some want a sit-down meeting or a video conference or a text exchange, whatever it is. Figure out how you're going to talk with the client. And then again, about what? Do they want details? Some clients want details. They want to know all the stuff that's happening. Others want just a very, very high level. If you take the person, there's a modality called be brief, be brilliant, be gone. You all know people like that, right? A lot of lawyers fall into that bucket. And if you go into a long explanation with them, they start scratching their head and they start doing email and you're not communicating. Give them the 2-line, this is what's happening, here is the biggest issue I see, any questions? Others, you do that and they're going, okay, yeah, but what about the details? You got to figure out what person you're dealing with and figure out what level you talk to them. So about what? 4th item is cost. What will it cost? Time and money. And money can represent whatever the currency is, whether it is actual budget dollars or real dollars changing hands or simply time. But there is a time cost to the client as well. So I need you, as my client, I need you to participate in this conference on Monday morning. Can we get that scheduled, please? Letting them know in advance this is going to take some of your time. Or I actually need you to review this document before I send it out. So if you want to send it out on Wednesday, how much time do you need to review it? So what will it cost the client in terms of time? And then, of course, this is going to run $11,000, give or take. When is the cost going to hit? In terms of time, next Monday. In a long-term project, clients have quarterly budgets. So when is this going to hit their budget? And then ultimately, no surprises. It's a good thing to say to any client, you will never be surprised by my bill. I will always let you know in advance what's happening. We will set rough budgets, and if there is something that causes me to exceed that budget, I will let you know before I do it. Don't surprise them. Surprises are not good in this business. All right, oops. Okay, so finally the conditions of satisfaction, the critical success factors. These are what I talked about earlier when I spoke about done. What matters to the client? What are the 3 things? It could be 4. It can't be 14. What are the 3 things that matter to the client on this particular project? And if you're not sure, question number 2, how does the client get promoted? If you understand how they advance in their job, you will have some real insight into what matters to them. If it is a business client in particular, but even inside a law firm, if you're in the law library, for example, how is that? What matters to that client? Is it simply take home? Is it getting to be partner? Is it getting to be a higher level equity partner? Maybe some people have this mistaken idea they want to become managing partner. That usually lasts about a week and a half, and then they get the job and they discover it's not what they thought it was. But what matters to the client, to your client, and to the project's client especially? I always list out 3 things. Try and keep it to 3. Again, in larger projects, it may be 4 or 5. Rarely 5. I rarely will push back against the 5th one. What matters to the client, and I want you to agree with me, this is what we are doing. And I will say to the client, if we do these 3 things for you, and if we do them successfully, whatever success means and what we're discussing here, will you claim that this project is a success? Will you believe this project is a success? Will you call it successful? And I get their agreement on that. Now, that doesn't mean they can't go back on their word. But it really does set expectations up front. So when we deliver these things, yeah, there are always a couple of loose ends. But you can either have them focus on picking at the loose ends, or you can have them focus on the great job you did for them. I want them focused on the great job I hopefully did for them. So conditions of satisfaction. Right? Deliverables, you do what you say you'll do. Timeline, you do it when you say you'll do it and when the client expects it. Communication, you understand how you will communicate with the client, whether it is email, whether it is phone, voicemail. I mean, some clients love voicemail. Some will say, they won't say, I never check my voicemail. They will say, nobody ever checks their voicemail because everybody thinks their modality of communication is the only one that works. How does the client want to communicate? How does my partner want to communicate? I am supposedly a smart guy. I better adapt to what they want. What's it going to cost them? No surprises. And then finally, what are your critical success factors? What are the 3 things that really matter? Now, going back to that, there's always going to be some baseline blocking and tackling. Again, we're talking about a litigation. If there are court deadlines, I'm going to meet court deadlines. I expect that is simply a given. That's not critical success factor. If like somebody's doing an IT project for me, going back to the Microsoft days, I would expect that they will give me information as to what is not working for them and how they're being pulled in other directions, so I can monitor how they're doing. That to me was simply a baseline. That wasn't one of my critical success factors. So there are always some baseline things, but the critical success factors are the real things on which you will be judged, and that is how you set client expectations. So we're into the start of the 2nd hour, and we're on the last one. That's good timing. Project management, as I said, is about timing. You manage people by giving assignments effectively. It's not the only way to do it, of course. Leadership is critical. But I'm going to talk about this one item right now, is how to give assignments effectively. This is a scientific method that is proven that works. So what are the biggest causes of unplanned write-offs? I got write-offs in quotes because if you're in a corporate law department or you're not billing the client, then they're not the traditional write-offs. But nonetheless, it is wasted work. What is the biggest cause of unplanned wasted work? I emphasize unplanned because there is a certain amount of, you do training with somebody. You're helping them learn something. Yeah, there's going to be time that is not necessarily spent effectively on that. That's fine. That's not unplanned. But the biggest causes of unplanned write-offs all have to do with assignments given incorrectly. More time was spent than was expected. The assignment was not properly understood. There was a conflict among resources. These are the 3 biggies. They all have to do with giving an assignment effectively. So let's talk about how we do that. There are half a dozen things, actually a little more, 7 things I think, that focus you on how to give an assignment. I'm going to group these. They don't all get talked about in this particular order, but I'm going to group them for logic's sake. So the first is timing. What is the deadline? If I'm giving you an assignment, what's the deadline? Is that deadline work for you? What are the target hours? What's the budget? And I usually am going to ask that as a question first. How long do you think this is going to take? 20 hours. I'm going, okay, I thought this would take 10. Okay, I didn't realize it was going to take quite that long. What do you see as your tasks here that are going to add up to 20 hours? Well, there's X and Y and Z. No, you don't have to do Y. Joe did Y last week on an identical matter. Crib from him. Take his thing and change the names. Oh, I can do that? Yeah. All right, maybe we're closer to 10 hours. Or it goes the other way. I'm going to do X and Y and Z, and Right, why? I didn't think about task why. Yeah, you're right, it is going to be 20 hours. So have that as a conversation and ultimately a negotiation. I don't want you to spend more than 20 hours on this. The client cannot afford more than 20 hours. We cannot afford having you tied up for more than 20 hours on this thing. So that helps keep assignments real and within limits. Okay, what can you give me for 20 hours? And then check-ins. I always ask people when I'm giving them assignments, I always ask them for a check-in about a sixth of the way through the project. Now this is on an assignment more than, say, 8 hours. If it's a 2-hour thing, no, I don't need a check-in. But if it's a 5-day project, at the end of the 5 days, 40 hours, so at the end of 8, 7, 6, 9 hours, you're going to know all the things you forgot to ask me when we talked about this the first time. So I want you to check in. Just how's it going? It doesn't need to be formal. It can be a quick email. Hey, everything's cool. It can be stick your head in my office. It can be a phone call. It can be a sit down. Whatever it is, whatever works for you, I don't care. But just stop by, check in with me in some real or virtual form. Let me know how it's going. Because the real thing this does, I'm not checking up on you. I don't care. I don't want to micromanage you. I've got better things to do with my time. But it is a guaranteed time that you can ask me questions without worrying, oh, Steve's too busy, or Steve's tied up on things, or his door is closed, or I don't want to interrupt, whatever it is. No, it's a guaranteed time you can ask me more questions. That's why it's valuable, hidden purpose to it. That's timing, the basics. Who's the client? What's the matter number? Where are the documents kept? What are the sources? Relevant laws, whatever the basics may be. Right? What journal are we using? Whatever this may be. You just got to make sure that stuff's out in the open. And there's another part of the basics, which is the legal project management info. Here's the project charter, assuming you have not been on this project in the beginning. Here's the schedule for everybody. Here's the overall budget for the project, etc. Other shared information. Here's where we are storing our documents. Here's our SharePoint site. Here's our shared OneNote page, whatever it may be. And I'm going through all this. So it only takes, so I do this in classes, to give a real assignment. And I have them actually give the person they're partnered with, I have people partner up, give a real assignment. But I've got this checklist. They've got this checklist in front of them. And I say the only difference is that the person who you're giving the assignment to isn't actually going to do it, so if they're from a different branch of the firm, it doesn't matter if they don't understand a single word you're saying. And it invariably takes only 6 to 8 minutes to fully give even a complex assignment properly. So the intent. What is the nature of the matter? This is usually covered in the charter. Why is this work needed? Why are we doing it? What matters? And why now? Because that is what will instill a sense of urgency, if there is one, in the person receiving the assignment. Why now? Because this has to be done on Wednesday because it has to go to Tom, and Tom needs to process it and get it to the client by Friday. Oh, yeah, okay, I guess Wednesday's a real deadline, not something the project manager made up because he doesn't like me. What's the deliverable? Is it a memo? Is it a letter, a brief, etc.? Is it a draft version or a final? Any oral reports, any sit-down, any meetings that have to be done as part of this? All of this is important because you don't want that 14-page memo if you're only sending them in search of a yes-no answer. And it depends is not really the right answer here. And then finally, the last step, what do I want you to do with this? If I don't know you very well, if I haven't worked with you before, or if this is a major step up for you in terms of responsibility, or a new area you've never tackled before, do not send your final report on to anyone but me. Run it by me first, and I will take a look. If I've worked with you before, if I know you, if I trust you, go send it on and just send me an email that it's been done or copy me on the mail that sends it. All right? I'd actually rather not have you copy me directly on the mail because I don't want the client to think that I'm looking over your shoulder, that I need to be copied on everything. Or maybe with some clients I do want that. But for people that I trust, go, do it. Send it out. Just let me know that you're done so I can check it off my list, whether that's a formal list or a mental list that I'm keeping. I try and keep real running lists of assignments that I give people. Hypothesis. If this is a legal issue or an issue within the particular subject matter expertise of both of you, and you have a best guess on where to start, offer that. Don't do it for them, but offer them a help on where to start. Again, if it's a training exercise, you might not do that part. Who's available? Access. When am I available? You can come to me not only at the check-in, but I'm off Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm at a meeting at a client site, but give me an email. I'll answer it at night when I get back to the hotel room. Who else is available? Oh, Craig down the hall knows this stuff. If you can't find me, find Craig. Now, I want some confirmations. Do you have time? And I usually ask this one pretty early. Do you have time to do this? And again, I will look at the person that I'm delegating to. And if the person is significantly junior or is, say, new to my group, I am very afraid they're always going to answer yes the first time because they're afraid to say no. And so I will be really cautious about how I phrase that. Most of the time, if I've worked with somebody for a while, they know that I don't really have time is a legitimate answer. And sometimes I may say, well, let's rearrange your schedule. Let's make time. Sometimes I'll say, all right, look, what else can we do here? But you want to have that conversation early, not sheepishly a couple of days later. Ownership. I expect you to own this. I am not going to look over your shoulder. I expect you to schedule the check-in. I expect you to do the running around for whatever needs to be done. If you need help, I am here. I will be glad to help. But it is your ownership. You are responsible. I'm not going to be chasing you up on this thing. I do expect you to take ownership.